The break room at St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital was a study in beige exhaustion. It smelled perpetually of stale coffee, microwavable meals, and the faint antiseptic tang of despair that clung to the scrubs of those who worked the graveyard shift in the emergency department. It was a room of forced respite, where conversations were murmured and laughter was a rare, fragile thing. And in this room, like every other room she occupied, Nurse Alara Vance sat with her back against the cool, unyielding cinder block wall. Her chair was angled precisely to give her an unobstructed view of the single doorway, her coffee mug held in a loose, ready grip. Her gaze, a placid shade of storm cloud gray, would occasionally drift to the entrance, a flicker of assessment so brief it was almost subliminal, before returning to the worn medical journal in her lap. Her colleagues had long ago filed this habit away under the category of personal eccentricity. They were a collection of hardened professionals, each with their own armory of coping mechanisms, and Alara's was simply more visible than most. They called it her perch or Vance's watchtower. It was a source of gentle, behind-the-back amusement. David, a portly doctor with a gallows humor honed by 2 decades of trauma, had once joked that she was expecting the Spanish Inquisition. Maria, a young, earnest nurse, believed it was a manifestation of social anxiety. The consensus was that it was a harmless quirk, a piece of the puzzle that was the quiet, unnervingly competent Alara Vance. She was an enigma, wrapped in plain blue scrubs and an aura of profound stillness. Ilara was, by all accounts, an exceptional nurse. Her hands were steady during the most chaotic resuscitations, her voice a low, calming anchor in the maelstrom of a code blue. She moved through the emergency department with an economy of motion that bordered on supernatural, never a wasted step, never a fumbled instrument. Her knowledge of anatomy and trauma care was encyclopedic, often anticipating a doctor's needs seconds before the request was even verbalized. Yet she remained profoundly distant. Her personal life was a locked room to which no one had a key. The only clue to a past outside these sterile walls was a thin, silvery scar that cut a delicate path from her left temple into her hairline. When asked about it, her response was always the same placid, dismissive murmur, "A clumsy fall, years ago." The explanation felt as thin as the scar tissue itself, a flimsy curtain drawn over a much larger stage. There were other tells, of course, but they were visible only to those who knew what to look for, and no one at St. Jude's did. There was the way she assessed a room upon entering, her eyes cataloging exits, potential cover, and the disposition of every person within seconds. There was the unnatural calm she displayed when a gang-related multi-victim incident flooded the bays. Her heart rate, if measured, would have likely remained stubbornly close to resting. She processed chaos not as a threat, but as a series of tactical problems to be solved. Once, a police officer, bringing in a suspect with a gunshot wound, had his sidearm unholstered. Ilara, while simultaneously applying a tourniquet to the suspect's leg, had spoken in a voice devoid of alarm but full of quiet command. "Officer, reholster and engage your retention. This is a sterile field, not a hot zone." The cop, startled by her tone and the technical accuracy of her language, had complied without a second thought, only realizing later how strange the correction had been coming from a nurse. Tonight, the air in the ER was thick with the usual symphony of urban misery, a cacophony of beeping monitors, hacking coughs, and the distant wail of an incoming ambulance played on a loop. Ilara was charting at the central nurses' station, her chosen seat once again granting her a panoramic view of the sliding glass doors of the ambulance bay and the main waiting room entrance. Her posture was perfect, a straight line of disciplined stillness that contrasted sharply with the weary slumps of her coworkers. She was a predator resting in a field of gazelles, a creature of a different, more dangerous ecosystem, perfectly camouflaged by the mundane. The catalyst for the night's unraveling arrived not with the scream of sirens, but with the arrogant swagger of privilege. Mr. Alistair Thompson, the hospital administrator, swept into the ER, his tailored suit a stark rebuke to the functional chaos surrounding him. He was a man carved from polished fear and ambition, his smile a brittle facade that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. Trailing him was a young man in designer clothes, reeking of expensive cologne and cheap whiskey, his arm in a makeshift sling. This was Dylan Croft, son of the construction magnate who had funded the hospital's new cardiac wing. Thompson orbited the young man like a nervous moon, his voice a sycophantic coo. "Right this way, Mr. Croft. We'll have you seen immediately. Nurse, a private room for Mr. Croft now." Thompson barked, snapping his fingers at Maria, who was attempting to triage an elderly woman with respiratory distress. Maria, flustered, tried to explain that all private rooms were occupied. Dylan Croft scoffed, a petulant sneer twisting his handsome face. "What is this, a public clinic? I need a doctor. My arm might be broken." His injury was, to Alara's trained eye, a minor sprain at worst, the kind of self-inflicted wound that came from a drunken fall from a bar stool. The situation deteriorated quickly. Croft, impatient and belligerent, began verbally abusing Maria, his voice rising in volume. "Are you deaf or just stupid? Get me someone who knows what they're doing." He took a step toward her, his posture aggressive. Thompson did nothing, his expression one of pained appeasement aimed solely at the donor's son. Before the young man could take another step, a calm, low voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Ilara had risen from her chair. She hadn't moved quickly, but she was suddenly just there, positioned between Croft and Maria, a tranquil yet immovable object. "You will lower your voice," Ilara stated. "It was not a request. And you will step back. You are disrupting a medical facility." Croft, taken aback, turned his drunken fury on her. "And who the hell are you? The scrub nurse police?" He jabbed a finger toward her face. Ilara didn't flinch. Her eyes, which had been placid moments before, now held a flat, chilling emptiness. It was the look of a sniper settling a crosshair. "I am the nurse who is telling you to control yourself. You will be triaged according to the severity of your injury after this woman who is struggling to breathe." Thompson, seeing his patron's son being challenged, finally acted. "Nurse Vance," he hissed, his face flushed with anger and panic. "Apologize to Mr. Croft at once. This is completely unprofessional." Alara's gaze remained locked on Dylan Croft, who was now sputtering with indignation. She ignored Thompson entirely. To Croft, she said, "There is a chair in the waiting room. Go sit in it. Now." The sheer, unadulterated command in her tone momentarily sobered the young man. He hesitated, a flicker of fear in his eyes, before his arrogance reasserted itself. But it was too late. Thompson, seeing the confrontation as a direct threat to his fundraising, stepped forward. "Vance, my office. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. You are on formal report for insubordination and harassing a patient." He then turned to Croft, his obsequious smile returning. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Croft. We will handle this, employee." The next morning, Ilara stood before Mr. Thompson's expansive mahogany desk. The office was an altar to ego, filled with framed photos of Thompson shaking hands with politicians and local celebrities. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a silent witness to the impending injustice. Thompson leaned back in his leather throne, a caricature of self-importance. He had not offered her a seat. He intended this to be a dressing down, a ritual of humiliation to reassert his dominance. "Your behavior last night was abominable, Nurse Vance," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You seem to forget who pays your salary. It is the generous patronage of families like the Crofts that keeps this hospital running. Your job is to provide care and comfort, not to lecture our benefactors." Ilara remained silent, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Her expression was neutral, a carefully constructed mask of professional deference. This impassivity seemed to enrage Thompson more than any argument would have. He saw it not as discipline, but as a lack of contrition. "I have reviewed your file," he continued, tapping a manicured finger on a folder. "Exemplary performance reviews, commendations, it's all very impressive on paper. But there's a consistent note from your supervisors: aloof, distant, not a team player. It seems you have an authority problem, a belief that the rules do not apply to you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let me be clear. You work for me. The Crofts are worth more to this hospital than your entire career. You will write a formal letter of apology to young Mr. Croft, and you will be on probation for the next 6 months. Any further complaints, and you will be terminated. Do you understand me?" Ilara's only response was a quiet, "I understand." There was no emotion in her voice, no anger, no fear. It was the flat, toneless affirmation of a soldier receiving an unjust but binding order. It was the calm of a dormant volcano, and Thompson, in his arrogance, was dancing on the crater's edge. That night, the ER was unnaturally quiet for the first few hours of her shift. The calm before the storm. Ilara went about her duties with the same quiet efficiency as always, the encounter with Thompson seemingly forgotten. But a subtle tension now coiled in the air around her, a low hum of energy that only she could feel. She checked the crash carts, not just for inventory, but noting the weight and balance of the defibrillator paddles. She restocked the suture kits, her fingers brushing over the cold steel of the scalpels and forceps. She was taking inventory of her environment, an unconscious habit from a lifetime ago, suddenly and inexplicably rising to the surface. In the waiting room, a man sat hunched in a hard plastic chair, trying to be invisible. He wore civilian clothes, but they fit him awkwardly, like a costume. His posture, the way his eyes constantly swept the room, the controlled tension in his shoulders, it all screamed military. He had a deep, ragged gash on his forearm, crudely wrapped in a blood-soaked handkerchief. He was Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a federal agent on a protection detail, and his principal, a key witness in a massive racketeering case, was currently being treated for a diabetic emergency in Bay 4. It was a cover story. The transport convoy had been ambushed less than a mile from the hospital. Thorne had taken a piece of shrapnel to the arm while returning fire, but the rest of his team and his principal had made it inside. He was the outer perimeter, a wounded wolf standing guard. The chaos arrived at 10:47 p.m. The sliding glass doors to the ambulance bay hissed open, but it was not a gurney that came through. It was 3 men. They moved with a fluid, terrifying synchronicity that spoke of endless drills and real-world violence. They wore black tactical gear, carried short-barreled rifles, and their faces were obscured by balaclavas. They were not junkies looking for a score. They were professionals, a clean, efficient kill team. The lead operative, a mountain of a man with cold, dead eyes visible through the slit in his mask, raised his rifle. "Nobody moves," he barked, his voice muffled but clear. Panic erupted. A wave of screams and terrified gasps washed through the ER. Nurses and doctors dove for cover behind counters and gurneys. Patients who could move scrambled from their beds. Mr. Thompson, who had been making his nightly rounds, let out a pathetic squeak and dove under the main reception desk, pulling a decorative ficus plant in with him. In the waiting room, Sergeant Thorne instinctively reached for the sidearm he no longer had, his good hand pressing against his bleeding wound as he tried to blend in with the terrified civilians. His mind raced, calculating odds, assessing threats. 3 hostiles, professional, heavily armed. He was injured, unarmed, and out of position. It was a fatal funnel, a kill box. But amidst the pandemonium, one person did not scream. One person did not hide. Ilara Vance had been charting when the men entered. From her seat at the nurse's station, she had seen them the instant the doors opened. In the microsecond it took for others to process the threat and react with fear, her mind had processed it as a tactical problem. Her placid expression dissolved, replaced by a mask of absolute predatory focus. The quiet nurse was gone. In her place stood something else entirely, something ancient and lethal. Her breathing slowed, her pupils dilated slightly, taking in every detail. Their gear, their formation, a classic 3-man stack, their weaponry, the way the leader scanned the room, looking for a specific target. She saw Sergeant Thorne in the waiting room, saw the blood on his arm, the telltale bulge of an empty shoulder holster under his jacket. She recognized him for what he was, a friendly but an ineffective one. She saw Thompson cowering under the desk. She saw the fear on Maria's face. And in that frozen moment, a decision was made. The vow she had made to herself years ago, the promise to leave that world behind, shattered like glass. They had brought the war to her sanctuary. They had threatened her patience. They had cornered her, and a cornered wolf does not surrender. Her movement was a whisper. She did not rise. She flowed from her chair, keeping low. Her first action was not aggressive, but tactical. She kicked the rolling stool she'd been sitting on, sending it careening into a tall IV pole. The pole crashed to the ground with a loud metallic clang, drawing the attention of the nearest gunman for a precious half-second. It was all she needed. She moved like smoke, a blur of blue scrubs hugging the shadow of the reception desk. The gunman turned back, his rifle sweeping the area, but she was already on him. She came from his blind spot, a phantom of controlled violence. Her left hand shot out, not to grab the rifle, but to cup the back of his neck, her thumb digging into the pressure point below his ear. A jolt of pure agony shot through him, his grip on the weapon momentarily slackening. In that same fluid motion, her right hand slammed the base of his skull, driving his masked face into the hard edge of the counter. There was a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. He went limp, his rifle clattering to the linoleum floor. She caught it before it hit the ground, her fingers instinctively finding the magazine release and safety. She checked the chamber, her movements economical and sure. The entire takedown had taken less than 2 seconds. The second gunman, hearing the muffled thud, began to turn. He never completed the motion. Ilara, now armed, didn't raise the rifle to her shoulder. She fired from the hip, a controlled 2-round burst. Not at his center mass, his body armor would stop that, but at his pelvis. It was a brutal, disabling shot taught only in the most elite echelons of special operations. The rounds shattered his pelvic girdle, and he went down with a strangled cry, his legs instantly useless. He was neutralized as a threat, but alive. A conscious choice. She was not an executioner. She was a surgeon of violence. From his hiding place, Mr. Thompson peered over the edge of the desk. His mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. The quiet, insubordinate nurse was holding a military-grade rifle, moving with the terrifying grace of a panther. Her face was serene, utterly devoid of fear or panic. It was the face of a professional at work. In the waiting room, Sergeant Thorne's jaw hung open. He had seen Tier 1 operators move before, Delta, DevGru. He was watching it now. The precision, the speed, the sheer brutal efficiency. It was unmistakable. He wasn't watching a nurse. He was watching a ghost. The leader of the team, the only one left standing, was a true professional. He didn't panic. He reacted. He spun, raising his own rifle and firing a volley of suppressive fire toward Ilara's position. Bullets tore through the drywall of the reception area, sending up clouds of white dust. Computer monitors exploded in showers of sparks and glass. Ilara was already gone, diving into a low roll behind a heavy steel gurney. The round stitched the air where she had been a moment before. He began to advance, using the chaos to close the distance. "Target is hostile. I repeat, target is hostile," he yelled into his throat mic, assuming she was part of the protection detail he'd been warned about. He was fast, but she was faster. He was trained, but she was forged. She came out from the other side of the gurney, low to the ground. He adjusted his aim, but he was expecting her to be upright. Firing from a low angle, she put a single, precise round through his thigh, severing his femoral artery. He screamed, a raw, piercing sound of shock and agony, and collapsed, his weapon skittering away from his grasp. He clutched at his leg as a dark, pulsing torrent of blood soaked through his tactical pants. A fatal wound. He would be dead in 90 seconds. The ER was suddenly shockingly silent. The only sounds were the whimpering of the terrified staff, the agonized groans of the 2 wounded gunmen, and the steady, calm rhythm of Ilara's breathing. She stood in the center of the room, the rifle held in a low ready position, her eyes scanning the entrances, the bays, every shadow. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the operation might not be over. The silence was broken by the squeal of tires outside, followed by the slamming of multiple car doors. The main doors to the waiting room burst open. It was not more gunmen. It was a phalanx of men in dark suits and earpieces, moving with the same professional purpose as the attackers, but on the right side of the law. They swept into the room, weapons drawn, shouting, "Federal agents!" They cleared the area with practiced efficiency, their eyes taking in the scene of carnage. 3 neutralized hostiles, terrified civilians, and 1 woman in blue scrubs holding an assault rifle, looking more dangerous than anyone in the room. They cautiously raised their weapons toward her. "Drop the weapon! On the ground now!" Before Alara could respond, a new figure appeared in the doorway, parting the sea of agents like a battleship. He was a man in his late 60s, tall and ramrod straight, wearing the immaculate uniform of a four-star general of the United States Army. His chest was a constellation of ribbons and medals. His face was a craggy landscape of command and authority, and his eyes, a piercing blue, swept the room, missing nothing. He saw the downed hostiles. He saw the wounded Sergeant Thorne, now being tended to by a trembling Maria. Then his eyes found Alara. The general's stern expression faltered, replaced by a look of profound, utter disbelief. The agents, seeing their commander's focus, held their fire but kept their weapons trained on her. The general took a slow step forward, his gaze locked on Alara. The world seemed to shrink, the chaos of the room fading into a muted background hum. He ignored everyone else, the agents, the staff, the cowering administrator. His voice, when he spoke, was not a shout, but a low, booming rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hospital. It was a voice accustomed to commanding armies, and it cut through the ringing silence with the force of a physical blow. "Captain Vance," he breathed, the name an invocation, a prayer answered after a decade of silence. "My God, we thought you were dead." The agents lowered their weapons as one, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. "Captain? This nurse was a captain?" Ilara's face, which had been a mask of cold combat focus, finally softened. A flicker of something ancient and weary passed through her eyes. She slowly, deliberately, placed the rifle on the floor and kicked it away, her hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. The general strode forward until he was standing directly in front of her. At that moment, Mr. Thompson, sensing a shift in power and an opportunity to save himself, scrambled out from under the desk. His suit was askew, his hair a mess, and a leaf from the ficus plant was stuck to his forehead. "General!" he cried, his voice shrill with manufactured relief. "Thank God you're here. This woman and this nurse of mine. She went insane. She attacked these men. She's a menace." He pointed a trembling finger at Alara. The general did not even grant Thompson a glance. His eyes remained fixed on Alara. He slowly turned his head, and the full, unbridled force of his Arctic blue gaze fell upon the administrator. The look was one of such pure, unadulterated contempt that Thompson physically recoiled, his words dying in his throat. "You will be silent," the general commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. He then turned back to Alara, his expression softening with a deep paternal respect. He gently took her hands, which were steady as rock, and turned them over, examining them as if they were priceless artifacts. "The call sign," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you remember the call sign they gave you?" Alara gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. A ghost of a memory surfaced. "Nix," she whispered, the name feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years. "Nix," the general repeated, his voice now booming for all to hear. He turned, addressing the entire room, the stunned doctors, the terrified nurses, the federal agents, and the pathetic, cowering form of Alistair Thompson. "You want to know who this woman is?" he thundered. "You call her a nurse. You call her a menace. I call her a hero. This is Captain Alara Vance, United States Army Special Operations Command, a name that is spoken with reverence in circles you people cannot even imagine exist." He paced before them, a lion in a cage of lesser beasts. 10 years ago, in a valley in Kandahar province so remote it doesn't have a name, Captain Vance's unit was ambushed. They were outnumbered 10-1. Their exfiltration helicopter was shot down. Command wrote them off as a total loss. He stopped and pointed a finger directly at Alara. For 72 hours, this woman, with a shattered collarbone and a piece of shrapnel in her skull, single-handedly held off an entire enemy platoon. She coordinated airstrikes from a broken radio, tended to the wounded members of her team, and when their ammunition ran dry, she met the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. She is the sole reason 5 members of that team made it home to their families. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, our nation's second highest honor, an award she never collected because when the rescue birds finally landed, she was gone. She vanished. We thought she had succumbed to her wounds in the wilderness, or worse. He walked over to Alara and gently brushed the hair back from her temple, revealing the thin, silvery scar. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice laced with venom, "I am told this woman has a scar. She tells people it is from a clumsy fall." He looked at the administrator, his eyes blazing. "This scar is from the rocket-propelled grenade that killed her commanding officer and her medic instantly. It is the price she paid to save her brothers. She wears the cost of your freedom on her face, and you put her on report." The weight of his words settled over the room, a suffocating blanket of shame and awe. Maria looked at Alara, her eyes filled with tears. David, the cynical doctor, simply stared, his mouth agape. Sergeant Thorne, being patched up, managed to push himself to a sitting position and executed a slow, perfect military salute. The general turned his full attention back to Thompson, who now looked small and utterly broken. His tailored suit seemed to hang off him, his ambition and arrogance evaporated into a puddle of pure terror. "You threatened the career of a national hero because she stood up to a drunken child," the general stated, his voice flat and deadly. He gestured to one of the federal agents. "Agent, get this man's name and full credentials. I want a complete federal audit of this hospital's finances, its board of directors, and its security protocols starting immediately. I want to know how a kill team managed to walk into this building unopposed. And as for you," he said, locking eyes with Thompson, "I expect your letter of resignation on the governor's desk by sunrise. If it is not, I will personally see to it that your professional life is dismantled piece by piece until you are unable to manage a high school bake sale. Is that understood?" Thompson could only nod, a pathetic, bobbing motion of his head as his entire world imploded. The room was silent for a long moment, the air thick with the gravity of the revelation. Then a single person began to clap. It was Maria. Her applause was hesitant at first, then grew stronger. Then David joined in, then another doctor, then the security guards, then the federal agents. Soon, the entire emergency department was filled with a thunderous, rolling ovation. It was not for a nurse. It was for a warrior, a guardian who had stood a silent watch over them all, unrecognized. Ilara stood in the center of the storm, her stoic facade finally cracking. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a quiet acknowledgement of a life she thought she had buried forever. She showed no triumph, no gloating, only a profound bone-deep weariness and a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any victory cry. The general placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Captain. Your watch is done. It's time to come home." Alara looked around the emergency room one last time, at the familiar chaos, the beeping machines, the faces of her colleagues now etched with a respect that bordered on worship. She gave a single, final nod. Her life here, her quiet penance, was over. She had tried to be a healer, but the world had reminded her that she would always be a shield. She turned and walked with the general toward the doors, the phalanx of agents falling into formation around them, a silent, respectful honor guard. She did not look back. As the doors hissed shut behind her, Sergeant Thorne watched her go. He finally understood. He looked at the chair at the nurse's station, the one angled just so, the one that always faced the door. Everyone had thought it was a quirk, a strange habit born of anxiety or eccentricity. They were all wrong. It had never been a quirk. It was a post. A lonely, silent vigil, kept day after day by a hidden wolf who had been tasked with protecting a flock that never even knew it was in danger. They thought she was just a nurse. They had no idea she had been their guardian all along.